Hello, I'm Paula Widdowson, Exec Member for Environment and Climate Change. So welcome today to this is our third live coronavirus Q&A, and thank you for joining us. We can use the next hour to address your questions, some of which have been submitted via email throughout the last weekend, and also questions that are being produced as we speak on Facebook, all highly exciting and technological stuff. If you've missed our previous Q&As, these are still available on Facebook and you can go and have a look. And once again, I must really thank all of our residents who are continuing to support their neighbourhoods through the volunteering, checking up those who are lonely, through the homeschooling, to sticking to the latest government guidance and enabling this virus to be slowed down and eventually go away. Everybody across the city is working together. We're all playing important roles. And I'd never realised how often I was going to wash my hands in the course of one day, all of which is working beautifully. Today is a really exciting day because it marks the reopening of more businesses across our city centre and some schools and childcare providers across the city, welcoming an increase of children through their doors, which is much needed. Perhaps you've seen our Let's Be York campaign. This is York's recovery plan with the public health at its heart. Minimising infection, remember washing your hands again, and supporting those at risk means we can be at the highest priority. Packs for businesses, including practical support, reopening safely from today, and also a whole host of signage that you will have seen around the city. I dare you to find how many Centurions or how many Viking helmets are on the pavements. These are helpful reminders, and there are some restrictions. There are some one-way systems because of our narrow streets. I really want to say a huge thank you to parents, carers, foster carers, childcare workers, teachers, and school staff who have worked so hard over the last 3 months to keep our children safe, healthy, and learning. As a city, we're transitioning into a recovery phase in our response to the coronavirus. And today, I'm glad to be joined by the experts on our panel to discuss your questions about our response, whilst paying special attention to two key topics, the reopening of business and the extending of school attendance in York. So, enough from me. Can I ask the panel to introduce themselves? Ian, can you start?
Yes, hello. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Ian Cuthbertson, and I'm the Executive Member for Children, Young People and Education. And my particular brief for being on the panel today is to talk about increasing attendance at schools and in early year settings.
Many thanks. Councillor Andrew Waller.
Hello, I'm Councillor Andrew Waller. I'm Executive Member for the Economy and Strategic Planning. So today's reopening of some businesses on top of those that have already been continuing to run through lockdown has been a vital moment in the operation of the city.
Many thanks. Sharon?
Hello everyone, I'm Sharon Stoltz. I'm Director of Public Health and I'm very pleased to be with you this evening.
Amanda.
Hello everyone, thanks very much for asking me to be part of the panel tonight. I'm Amanda Hatton and I'm Corporate Director of Children, Education and Communities, which means I've got responsibility for things like community hubs, social care and keeping children safe, and schools and early years.
Thank you. Maxine.
Hi everyone, I'm Maxine Squire. I'm Assistant Director for Education and Skills. So under my responsibility are early years, schools, apprenticeships and the careers service, and also the partnership arrangements with schools that we've got.
Many thanks. James?
Hello everybody, I'm James Gilchrist. I'm the Assistant Director for Transport, Highways and Environment, and I've been spending the last few months looking at how we get the city and its transport and its public space ready for recovery and how we respond to the virus.
And last but not least, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my name is Andrew Lowson. I'm the Director of the York Business Improvement District, or York BID as it's known. We represent about 1,000 businesses in the city centre and run well-known programs such as we have street cleaners, street rangers. We do things to attract people into the city centre, such as Christmas lights and festivals. But at the moment, obviously very focused on how we can support businesses through COVID-19 and how we work with partners, especially on the city reopening.
Many thanks. And as you can hear, we've got a whole panoply of experts in front of us. So I'm going to start with the very first question that was emailed in by Amy over the weekend. Amy's question is, we run a gym and have recently started outdoor boot camps. Following the 6-person rule and socially distancing, we are struggling to offer enough sessions for our members with the number restriction and risk losing more customers. When will the number increase for outdoor fitness? We are hoping that with non-essential shop openings, this may be looked at very soon. That sounds like one for you, Sharon.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Amy, for the question. I mean, I absolutely understand how difficult this is for people working in your sector. We're really driven by government guidance in relation to this. And so until the government release new guidance opening up this sector, I'm afraid that at the moment you're required to stick within that 6-person and social distancing rule. Hopefully that will change over the next few weeks, but I, like you, will probably find out by watching the government announcements in the evening news. I don't have any information about when we'll be expecting new guidance around that. So your guess is as good as mine at the moment.
Many thanks, Sharon. A comprehensive response. Now, Andrew Waller, this looks like one for you. This came in from Lisa over the weekend. What Lisa's interested in is, when can wedding ceremonies take place, given if it's just yourself and your partner getting married?
I'll just unmute myself. Thanks for that. Well, as the council, we've not yet been given permission from the government and the Registrar General to go ahead with marriage ceremonies. Once we've been given the go-ahead, we'll be able to offer small ceremonies. We'll be in a position to take a limited number of marriage and civil partnership notices from next week for events which may take place during the summer. That's as much as we have.
Oh, fantastic. And I know we're all looking forward to the weddings coming back again. So moving on to a question from Ian over the weekend. Now, this looks like quite a large ranging question. So I'm going to ask Andrew, and James to start thinking as I'm talking. The question from Ian is, how will the small cramped shops, cafes and pubs in the Shambles, Gudrumgate, etc. cope with social distancing in place? Is the council able to offer any practical help for them as opposed to financial help? James, do you want to start?
Yes. So the council's been contacting businesses from across the city to look at areas which, due to the constraints of the space outside the premises, they may need specific support around queuing or the space for spilling out from their premises. So we've been contacting businesses ready for today, and we'll be doing the same again as more clarity comes for the 4th of July in terms of their opening, in terms of the hospitality trade. So we've produced over 1,000 Let's Be York packages for businesses. This contains specific guidance as well as resources for them. So we gave out stickers over the weekend to businesses so that they could prepare for opening today. That also includes things like signage and the number of people that will be limited into their shop or premises at any point in time. We've put reminders to observe social distancing around, and we've provided those to premises as well. So any business that wants to look at that can look at it on our website, which is www.york.gov.uk/letsbeyork. And I'd encourage any businesses that are contemplating opening to contact us and seek advice and our support in helping them open up. And they can email us at our.city@york.gov.uk.
Many thanks for that. Andrew Lawson, I know that you've been out and about today, looking around town. Would you like to give us your views on what you've seen? Oh dear, has he frozen? Yep, I think Andrew's frozen.
A bit dodgy. So.
Do you want to try again? Yes.
Can you hear me? Good. I will try, see if we can get this answer. Okay, so I've been out and about today, and I think,
I think we're gonna have to call it quits there, Andrew. I think your connection's disappeared. I know that myself and Councillor Andrew Waller have also been out around town. Andrew, what have you seen when you've been walking through town?
There's been signs around the area, and in answer to the question that was raised, I think what has been done is a large mapping exercise for the city centre. It wasn't designed for social spacing in the Middle Ages, and therefore ensuring that there's sufficient space for social distance pedestrian access as well as queuing. There have been an examination of where spaces might be available for shops to spill out into the street, and that's something that the teams are working on, how to do this as effectively as possible, to help shops keep going. And as more and more open, this is going to become a more pressing concern, because there is a finite amount of space, and we do need to share that out evenly.
Yeah, and I think that there's a fabulous job being done by the guys in how you turn a medieval city with narrow streets into a modern city that we can actually all work around. Now, comments just come through on the chat box, which is one for you, James. So, has any consideration been given for incentives for car parking?
Yes, so that is something we are looking at. Obviously, we've had 1 day of non-essential retail opening, so we're closely monitoring the sort of how busy the city centre is. We need to get the balance right between incentivising people to come and obviously being able to maintain social distancing within the city. But that is something that we'll be asking executive to consider in the coming weeks.
Okay, many thanks for that. So moving on to our next question, which, James, you're a popular guy. I think this is your area again. It's about city. It's about city centre reopening and enforcement. Adam wants to know, with shops reopening today, can the council inform me as to how new restriction guidelines are being enforced? In addition, how are authorities monitoring the restrictions set by the shops themselves, such as 3 people inside at any one time? Are they being advised on this or making the decision for themselves?
Okay, thank you for that question. I think I'll start with the Let's Be York pack that we referenced in the last meeting, because that includes advice to businesses on how they should reopen and how they can organise customers both within their premises and in terms of queuing outside. So every business has to legally carry out a risk assessment in terms of how many people can be in their premises, etc. And we do have officers that are there to support businesses in undertaking that exercise. Ultimately, of course, if businesses fail to carry out a proper risk assessment or fail to implement it, then we can take the necessary action. But if people have concerns, they can email those to us at public.protection@york.gov.uk, and the council will take the proportionate action that's required. And ultimately, that could lead to some sort of enforcement action. But generally speaking, what we've seen through lockdown and indeed today is that, generally speaking, both the majority of businesses and their customers are actually behaving extremely well, and that's, you know, that's testament to York. And I think that's, you know, what all the Let's Be York campaign is about, is appealing for people to be considerate of each other, and that's what's worked incredibly well, and the city should be very proud of so far.
I'm going to bring Andrew Lowson in on that. I know, Andrew, that you've had a problem with your internet so that you're on the phone. But what are your views on that area? Have we got you? Because what I'd love to do is echo exactly what James has said. And I know that Councillor Waller and myself have had a conversation about this. The York residents, the York visitors have been fabulous in how they are behaving within town. So most people, most of the time, are being superb. We were one of the lowest, I think we're in the lowest 10% in terms of when Google measured activity for anybody breaking the lockdown. So we should be very pleased with ourselves. Andrew, have we got you?
Yes, can you hear me, Paula?
Yes.
Good. The wonders of Zoom. And I can't tell if I'm muted or unmuted, so thank you for someone who unmuted me. So yes, on this point, I think just picking up, I think, yes, we're encouraging to businesses to, to speak with one another because, we're all in this one together. And I think there's going to be lessons that we've all got to learn over the coming weeks. I think we've all got to be adaptable. Businesses, the council, the agencies are working on this because how the city centre is laid out and signage that we've got at the moment might need a bit of tinkering with because none of us really know, how people are going to come back. But I think one thing that we're looking to do is possibly, our street rangers at the moment are providing a little bit of reassurance for people, but we probably need more of a larger number. So we're looking at how we can tap into the volunteers that we have in York, because there's been a huge response from volunteers in terms of how they can help with COVID-19. And so we're looking to see if we can bring in some volunteers, almost as city hosts. So they'd be very visible. They'd be very much about providing advice on where there's toilets, hand sanitizer points, just highlighting where queuing, how that might work. Because I think even though at the moment we've got a lot of local people who know the city well, we're hoping that in the coming weeks, people will feel confident travelling a little bit further afield. We know that York will be a popular place to come to if people aren't going abroad. And I think at that point, to have as much information, as many friendly faces that we can have in the city centre, making people feel welcomed, I think that would be a great benefit to businesses. So yeah, that's something that as a bid we're looking to do, working with the City Council to see if we can get some volunteers almost to act as ambassadors on the streets.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And if we can all be supportive of one another and make sure that our visitors are welcome as well, it'll all work beautifully. Andrew, Andrew Waller, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, just to back up what James was saying about advice to businesses, we recognise that government guidance has been issued very rapidly, and sometimes people have had to respond within days to significant changes in the way that they would operate their business. So I think it's about a proportionate measure, and that we are giving advice to shopkeepers and business owners, so that if they do want to check some things, they can come through that public protection email address, but also recognising that there are businesses across the whole city. There are shops all over the city, and therefore advice and support is being given to those as much as it is to the city centre.
No, point well made, and it's for the entire city, not just for the city centre. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which was emailed in over the weekend as well. And this is from David about sustainable travel. So as the council have put in place temporary structures to facilitate wider pavements and room to cycle and socially distances, when will the council seriously consider more permanent infrastructure for sustainable travel in the city centre in light of its public health, environment and economic benefits? So I'm going to come across to you again, James, if you want to start us with that.
Okay. Yeah, so the council is working on further measures. So watch this space, I suppose, is the message. The executive on the 25th, I think from memory, are due to formally adopt a strategy around how we manage place and transport. But we've been implementing elements of that strategy already, obviously, in terms of we've extended the foot streets and those things that have been mentioned. What we need to recognise is that competition for space in our tight, narrow streets is significant, and that does cause us some challenges. But I would reassure, I can't remember his name, David, that the what we've done so far is not the end. There will be further measures coming, and that recognises cycle parking, which is what I think the question was about. So yes, that will be coming in the next few weeks, I would think.
I mean, and building on that, we do have our local transport plan coming along, which we've got all sorts of different measures that are city centre, that are village, and that are all the suburbs and secondary shopping centres in between. So there's an awful lot of work going on there.
Yeah.
Andrew, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, even our existing local transport plan puts active travel at the top of the hierarchy. So even within our existing local transport plan that we were set to review this year, walking, cycling are the top priorities in our local transport plan above things like the car. So already we recognise that, and already our policy position is trying to support those as much as possible.
Yeah, it's fantastic to see. Andrew, you've seen this change over the years, Andrew Waller. What have you got any comments to make for David?
I think it's important to note there are different groups of the population which will be behaving in different ways at the present time. Some people are able to engage in active transport, and as a cyclist, I've seen improvements year on year, but recognising that there will be people who will want to use their car. And I appreciate that in recent years we've tried to discourage car use, but we've just got to face for the next period of time that we've got to work with that, but in a way that doesn't lose the advantages in air quality and in connectivity that we've had already. So it will be consulted upon, and I think it's important that all groups work together is a way forward. Because I think that's the way that we will pull together as a city.
I think that's a very comprehensive answer for David. So many thanks for your expertise on that. Now I'm going to change tack slightly now, and we're going to move away from reopening the city, and we're going to go towards children and schools. So the next email question that we got was from Hillary. And the question is, I would like to know how you expect to protect our children when it took 5 days to identify that a child who had been allowed to attend nursery with cold symptoms wasn't sent straight home. I think that's a question for Maxine and for Sharon. So shall we start with yourself, Maxine?
Thank you, Paula. Obviously, I can't comment on that specific incident, but what I would say is that all our early years providers have been supported by the early years and childcare team to ensure that they're using the government guidance which relates to what happens if a child is presenting with symptoms of coronavirus in the setting. They are very clear about the facts that they should be sending both children and adults home if they are showing symptoms of the virus. I will leave it to Sharon to give the specific details of what to look for, because they are a bit more complex than just the symptoms of the common cold. But it's very clear in that guidance that children and adults who arrive at a setting with symptoms should go home and self-isolate for 7 days. Both children and educational professionals are also eligible to go and have a test to see if they have contracted the virus, and we are encouraging them to do so. There's good capacity at the testing centres at the moment, so it's possible to get that test done very, very swiftly. If you have individual concerns about a setting, it's very important to raise those with the setting manager and owner as quickly as possible to allow them to respond about the circumstances in their setting. I'll hand over to Sharon now with the public health advice that the settings have also been able to access.
Okay, thanks, Maxine. I suppose I'd like to start off by saying that many children, small children, will experience colds. Coughs and colds are quite common, particularly with preschool children. Having a runny nose, sniffles, maybe eyes a bit watery are all very common symptoms. And it doesn't mean that a child with those symptoms necessarily has coronavirus. I mean, the main symptoms of coronavirus is a high temperature, a new continuous cough, a loss or changed sense of smell or taste. Those symptoms, however, when you're talking about quite small preschool children, are quite difficult to be able to pinpoint. Small children can't tell you if their sense of smell or taste are affected, for example, and children won't necessarily always develop a cough either. So the general advice for children under 5 is that as a parent, to use your instincts. Most parents know when their child isn't well. So if your child has a high temperature, and don't worry if you haven't got a thermometer, you can tell if a child is hot. You can place your hand on their chest or on their back if they feel very hot to the touch. If they're generally off colour and you're worried about them, with a young child, the advice is always to ring NHS 111. And then 111 can take you through that child's symptoms. As Maxine has said, if they think that there is a chance that the child could have symptoms of coronavirus, they will be referred for a test. They'll be usually advised to self-isolate until the with the family until the results of that test are known. So in this particular case, it's possible that the child in nursery just had the common cold. So I wouldn't want to judge on the basis of this particular request from Hilary. But I'm pleased the question came in because it gives us an opportunity just to reinforce the kind of differences with very young children. And I would always encourage any parent who is worried about a child to ring NHS 111 and then to follow the advice that they're given. So thank you, Hilary, for sending that question through.
Okay, thank you ever so much for those full answers. We've had a couple of more questions come through on the email, on the Facebook. So a couple of questions, and I think, Maxine, this might be more in your court. I'll start with yourself. There's quite a few people interested in what was the risk analysis that the schools have undertaken, and what is the science being used by the schools so that they can reopen. Have you got any details on that?
Yeah, the risk assessment that's been completed by the schools has been done using, obviously, the very detailed guidance that the DfE produced to support schools with the pre-opening procedures. That was also as well reinforced by the school's own health and safety professionals. So many of our schools buy into health and safety advice, which is provided through a traded service through North Yorkshire. But they also, as well, many of the multi-academy trusts employ their own health and safety professionals. They've been guided as well throughout by advice that they've taken from our own city public health team. So as well as the messages that have come through from central governments, that's been reinforced by questions that they've been able to pose to our own public health teams. Those risk assessments have been very, very detailed, and the schools have backed them up with operational guidance that they've produced, both for staff teams and also that they've shared for parents and carers. And they've also shared those with their own internal school union reps and with the city's union reps as well. Which is something that they don't have to do, but they have been doing. And they have put those risk assessments as well through their governing bodies and their boards of trustees, so that they've had high-level sign-off on those. The maintained schools have also shared those risk assessments with the local authority. Again, it's not mandatory for them to do that, but they have provided those and shared those with the local authority. So we've had quite a lot of assurance from schools about the processes that they've gone through around risk assessment. That's also caused some schools to have quite a lot of additional expenditure around putting in more hand washing stations, ordering more supplies of alcohol, gel and various other things that they've needed. And they've also been supported by the school services teams, where they've needed additional wash basins to be put into schools. So quite a lot of work's gone on to provide reassurance that the schools can operate as safely as possible. In terms of the science, obviously they've been using the scientific messages that are being put out by central governments, and all of us have had to follow those. Sharon, do you want to say a little bit more about the science that's underpinned the public health messages?
So I think you've probably said most of it, Maxine, but just to emphasise really that there are two key areas of information that as a local authority we focus on, whether that's working with schools or any of our other partners. Obviously, we need to follow government guidance, and government guidance is published based on advice from scientists, both from Public Health England and from SAGE, the scientific advisory committee that obviously advises the government. But we also look at our own data and local intelligence of where we are with local cases in York as well. And so if, for example, I was concerned as Director of Public Health that we had an outbreak in a particular part of the city or in a particular school, we would clearly be working as a local authority very closely with that school in terms of safety and any additional measures that they needed to take if we saw a cluster of cases. What we've very fortunately seen in York is that the number of cases that we're seeing has dramatically fallen. We have seen very few cases involving young children in York. And so based on that local intelligence of what's happening with local cases and the government guidance, we feel that the schools have taken appropriate action to ensure that they can accept children safely. And I'm very confident that the risk assessments that have been done, as Maxine's described, have been very thorough, and that we have processes in place to be able to escalate any action that we needed to take if we started to see cases starting to rise. But fortunately, we're not in that position at the moment.
Wow, that's very comprehensive, and it sounds like our schools have got most absolutely under control. Very thorough. Okay, moving on to the next question. This is a question from Edward. And what he's asked is, we hear a lot about the support York Council is giving schools to help them reopen. For example, Councillor Cuthbertson was quoted in the York press about providing temporary classrooms to our schools. Can you clarify if you meant LA maintained schools or maintained and academy schools, and how many temporary classrooms and portaloos have been delivered since then? Well, that's one's definitely directed at you, Councillor Cuthbertson, if you would like to start the answer.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the support that we've given schools has not just been to help them reopen, it's to help them decide whether it's safe to reopen to extra pupils, to not take extra pupils, or even, should they wish to do so, to close. And that would depend on their risk assessment. So that process of risk assessment is quite fundamental to all this. Now, one of the problems with the government's rules about the number of pupils in a group and the number of teachers that can work with that group and the way that group has to behave throughout the school day means that actually a school has got a very limited amount of capacity. So thinking of a school where I'm a governor, the school has about 300 pupils and it's been able to take just short of 70. So that's less than a quarter of its number, and that's for, in theory, 3 year groups. So, and on top of that, our schools are on what we would call a tight site. In other words, there's not much space around it. There's basically the amount of space that the government requires for children to be able to exercise during their lunch breaks and their playtimes. So the situation is that we would consider it on a case-by-case basis, but remembering that schools have actually only been open a fortnight and the numbers have fluctuated quite a lot in that time, it's actually a very difficult decision for both head teachers and for the authority to take. So we haven't actually put any temporary classrooms in. Depending on what the government decides to advise over the coming weeks leading up to September, that is when we'll have a much better idea of whether we need to use temporary classrooms or not, because as it stands at the moment, if social distancing stays at 2 meters, if the maximum group size stays at 15, you can only have 1 teacher per group and separate hygiene and toilet facilities for each group, then that limits the number of pupils that can be accommodated in the school. And it means that temporary classrooms are probably unlikely to be needed. I'm not saying they won't, but they are, on the face of the numbers, unlikely to be needed. Having said that, in September, if we need to open schools more widely and if we have social distancing, then I think we have a problem in terms of finding space, and it may be that temporary classrooms will be needed then. I'm sorry, that's a bit of a rigmarole of an answer, but I hope it answers the question, and I hope it gives listeners some confidence that actually the situation has been quite carefully monitored by both schools and the authority.
Again, many thanks for all your expertise in that area. Your knowledge is fantastic. We've just had a quick question, and before we move on, I'd like to bring it to our panel's attention. Sharon, this is definitely one for you. We've had Jason come in on Facebook asking what are our thoughts on the lack of Pillar 2 data and how we're managing this.
Okay,
you might wish to explain to people what Pillar 2 data is.
Yes. So for those of you that aren't aware, through the NHS testing programme, there's Pillar 1 is for the results of the tests that are done through the NHS and Public Health England, and Pillar 2 is the data from the tests that are done through the drive-through centres and mobile testing facilities that some of you may have accessed. Pillar 2 is commissioned by the government from commercial partners such as Deloitte, for example. And at the moment, the only data that we have access to as local authorities is anonymised Pillar 1 data. We're not receiving any Pillar 2 data. That is a concern because we have good information on the number of patients being admitted to hospital, for example, with COVID symptoms. We have very good information on tragically the number of deaths due to COVID that have been registered. And we are now beginning to have some information about the number of people that have accessed NHS 111 through the data sharing that we have with GP practices. But neither the NHS nor ourselves in local authorities are receiving the Pillar 2 data at the moment. The reason that's a concern is it means that we don't have a full picture of the spread of the virus in our communities. what we're doing about that, we are doing everything that we possibly can. So there was a letter that was sent to the Secretary of State a couple of weeks ago that was signed by the leader of the council and the leaders from the other main political parties. So that letter has gone. There's also been lobbying of ministers that has been carried out, certainly by the leader of the council as well. As Director of Public Health, through my membership of professional organisations, have been lobbying along with other directors of public health across the country. And we have received assurances from government that they're working on putting in place mechanisms for that data to be shared and for it to be shared safely in accordance with information governance rules, etc. So
I'm going to probably stop you there, Sharon, because I think that's a very fulsome answer. And just to underline exactly what you're saying, I know that the leader of the council in York and that the leaders of the North York County Councils and all of the people that we're associated with are pressing very hard for government to give us those numbers, because we need them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the public will know when we get them, because we'll be able to publish them.
Fantastic. I'm going to go back to schools now. Another question about school capacity. What organisations have been approached to see if they can help with temporary classrooms? So rather than the temporary classrooms going up, what organisations such as the racecourse, the hotels, the Minster School from September, private schools? Amanda, is that one for you?
I think it could be. Thanks, Paula, and thanks for your question, Edward. As I think Councillor Cuthbertson and Maxine have both said, this is a complicated situation, which isn't just about physical space. It's also about teaching staff and how you can organise the right number of children in bubbles in the right kind of space. We have been talking to all of our schools around what kind of physical capacity they've got and how we can best use that. And we have started to have conversations with partners around whether or not we could access any of their space. However, the government guidance at the moment is that schools aren't to use community facilities and community buildings. They could look to use any additional capacity in secondary schools, but not any of those buildings that are out there in the community. So a number of those that Edward's listed in his question aren't places that we've got opportunity to use at the moment. We do have very regular contacts with the Department for Education, and we're in meetings with them at least weekly, and we feed back to them some of the challenges that some of their guidance is giving us. And I think this is one area we'll certainly be raising with them on Wednesday when we talk to them this week.
Maxine, do you have anything to add, or do we need to broaden it out and think about how do you also put all the teachers in there?
Yeah, one of the things that, as Amanda said, is we're in the process this week of mapping the capacity across the schools against various scenarios. One is that the 2 metre distancing continues. One is that we move to 1 metre. One is that it's business as usual in September. And developing our responses according to those 3 scenarios is going to be very, very important. The other thing in that DFE guidance that's been published today is that it's been very, very clear as well that schools should not be looking at scenarios at the moment that increase costs. So that's both in terms of they are being asked to work within their existing budgets around the numbers of staff that they've got available, and also not to look at additional buildings at this stage. So I think we're still waiting on the way in which the government views the planning for September, and we should be getting more news about that in the next week or so.
Okay, many thanks for that. There's a specific one from Edward as well about will supply teachers be used from September? So do you want to pick that up as well, Maxine?
Yeah, what we're looking at obviously is it's less a buildings issue than as Amanda said. It's more about the fact that if we're staying with small group sizes in September, then you need twice the number of adults that we currently have in schools. And so the options around using supply teachers, but also starting to look at those people who may well carry qualified teacher status but aren't currently working in schools, and whether they would consider coming back into the workforce is going to be important from September. So these are all things that we are starting to factor into our forward plan.
Okay, Amanda, do you have anything to add, or has Maxine give us the full answer?
I think Maxine's given us a very good answer on that one.
Fantastic. I'm going to move on to, and Edward, there are lots of questions from you. I'm going to move on to another question from Edward, which is about schools' digital assets. So his question is, now that Gavin Williamson has abandoned Boris Johnson's aspirations for wider primary school reopening, will the YSAB now switch to a model of some schooling, no matter how little, for all primary school children before the end of the summer term? Amanda, I'm going to start with you on that one.
Again, Edward, thanks for your question. We've been discussing how difficult it is to manage the challenges of staffing and also physical space within schools. And what that means is that all of our schools are prioritising vulnerable children first and making sure that we can get as many of those children into school to get the support that they need before we start expanding our places to other children. Because it is important to remember that schools have been open for vulnerable children right the way through lockdown and offering a fantastic service to those children. For some of our schools, what that means is that the physical space and the staffing combination means that we cannot safely increase to what year groups that have been suggested by the government, which means we certainly can't increase to all primary school children having access to schools. For others, we're able to increase across the year groups in a different way. But as we've said earlier in this meeting, it's very much around what is safe to do and what can we make sure we can do effectively based on risk assessments and the resources that we've got available. In terms of the digital assets, which I think was another part of this question, there has been lots of work done across the schools community, and I think it's really important to say this is all schools, so it's maintained schools and academies across the whole of the city, and we've worked very much as a city in relation to this, to think about how we can support those children who aren't able to access a school place in terms of their virtual learning and particularly access to digital equipment. So schools have been loaning equipment out to children, and we're also part of the national scheme, which means that we'll get laptops and Chromebooks and also dongles for a number of children who need them. We have had a message this afternoon, which is great news, which says we're going to get our allocated delivery, which is around about 500 devices, and they're going to be coming on the 19th of this month. So, you know, it's really good news that we've got additional resources coming into the city very soon.
Okay, many thanks for that. Now, there's a couple of questions coming up on Facebook that have also been all over the news. So I'm going to start, I think, with Councillor Ian Cuthbertson. And the question is, who is actually accountable for getting children back to school? Who's responsible? How does that work? It's in the newspapers, and we've got quite a lot of comments on the Facebook page about that. So Ian, over to yourself.
Yeah, this goes back to an act of a parliamentary act in 1988 called the Education Reform Act, which effectively put the responsibility for most of the operation of the school onto the head teacher and governing body, and in due course onto the head teacher and the academy board if it's not a maintained school but an academy. What that means is that the local authority cannot override what the head teacher and governing body or the head teacher and academy trust board have decided. And that was why I was keen to emphasise that our help to schools in the planning and assessment process was not aimed to help them reopen, it was aimed to help them make the decision. So it must be taken by the head teacher and the governing body or trust board. Our part in this has been to be involved as far as we possibly can be without actually doing it for them in the running and the operation of the cooperation process, the coordination between schools through York Schools and Academies Board. And so it doesn't matter whether a school's a maintained school or an academy, both sides of the system have worked together and they've worked hard to work out how they can do it safely, if they can do it at all safely. And that's the outcome. So we can't sort of infringe on their statutory responsibilities, but we can support them, whatever their decision, whether it's to stay open with the same number, take on some more pupils, or effectively to close if things were unsafe. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, that answers the question fully, Ian. Thank you ever so much. And another one that's been well and truly in the news is we keep hearing, and I think it was all over the news last night and certainly some comments on the Facebook page just now, that we know that some students are disadvantaged, significantly disadvantaged by their lack or adequate access to in just social circumstances. So we know that we've got 500 devices coming through, Amanda, on the 19th of June. But what are we doing in general about the disadvantaged children across our city?
Thanks, Paula. We have taken a very clear position that we want to prioritise those children who are disadvantaged and vulnerable in terms of access to school places. So as I said before, and it is important to reiterate, our schools have been open right the way through lockdown and working in really challenging circumstances to make sure that the most vulnerable children have been able to access face-to-face education. We've also had all of our schools working really hard on what does quality virtual learning look like and how can we support children to do that. So we're working with the schools community, but we're also working with volunteers and thinking about what's the wraparound support that sits around children and families to make sure that they're able to access that learning and do that effectively. And we have had some specialist expert input to support us with making sure that the support we've got in relation to vulnerable children and disadvantaged children is the best support that we are able to achieve. And we've done that currently, and we're continuing to do that, thinking about what does provision look like through any summer periods and looking at what summer schools might look like, how we can work with our cultural partners to support learning in its broadest sense over the summer period, and also what can we do for September.
That's fantastic, and I've seen the hard work that your area has put in and the magnificent stuff that Maxine puts in front of is fantastic. Now, we've just had another question through on Facebook, which is, what is going to be our provision for summer schools? How are we going to be, is there an opportunity to use those to bring the disadvantaged children through, to also let the other children actually have a sociable time with their peers? So Maxine, I'm going to go across to you for your thoughts on summer schools.
Okay, thank you. Well, obviously we are waiting a big national announcement about summer provision, which was trailed by the Prime Minister last week. And obviously we'll want to know fully what the details are around that.
Oh, you're frozen, Maxine. You need to shake your head.
Yeah.
Go again.
Yeah. Is it working? Yeah?
Yes.
Yes, okay. As I said, we're waiting for the national announcement from the DfE around their plans around catch-up and summer schools, which was trialled by the Prime Minister last week. But in York, we've been talking as well through our York Cultural Education Partnership around what the cultural partners can do to support children with cultural activities over the summer. One of the things that I would stress is that our schools have been open throughout the period of lockdown. So we've got a lot of tired teachers and school leaders at the moment. So they're not wholly welcoming the idea that schools would be open throughout the summer. So we will want to develop some work with volunteers and community partners to be able to signpost towards some of the fabulous activities that take place in the city anyway through some of those voluntary and community groups. We do know as well that there are schools that have been looking to extend their own offers as well, to look at activities that are beyond the normal curriculum. So we do have schools at the moment who are looking at activities which are not just about formal classroom learning, and about developing new skills and new hobbies for young people as well, and vocational skills. So one of our secondary schools is looking at partnering with volunteers in the community around things like gardening, art opportunities. We've got a very, very full programme of adult learning which takes place, and I'm just going to be beginning to talk to our family learning and adult learning team about the ways in which that they would be able to support extension of some of their offer over the summer as well for young people. We are looking at how we can pull together some of the richness that we know is out there, but to do that in a safe way, obviously, because the social distancing rules will apply to any summer activities as well. And the government guidelines will be quite clear about what can be provided over the summer to ensure that those social distancing rules are being followed around any summer activities as well.
Fabulous, and really good to hear all that activity that's going on. Now, there is another question that's come up that has, we're into the last 5 minutes, guys, so I'm going to ask each of you to think about your final thoughts on these areas, starting with schools and then moving back across to opening the city. But Amanda, if you could just very briefly let us know what's happening about free school meals and free school meal vouchers over the summer, because I've read various things in the press and I don't quite understand it.
Thanks, Paula. One of the things that's worked incredibly well during the COVID response has been the community hubs and the support that they've offered in relation to food support across the city, but also working very much with partners across the whole city, with businesses, with things like the Supper Collective to provide food for a whole host of people during the pandemic outbreak. What schools have done, as well as they've also provided a whole range of support for those children who were entitled to free school meals, and they've used the national voucher schemes, but before that was in place, they also used local schemes, which ranged from some schools actually providing food to others providing local vouchers. It doesn't look like the national scheme is going to continue over the summer holiday period, although there have been some various messages in relation to that. So we're working collectively with the community hubs to look at what kind of support can we offer throughout the summer period, as we have done in previous years. So some of you that have made contact with us today might have been aware of the big picnics that happened last year. So looking at how we can build on some really good practice that's happened previously and make sure we've got that in place over summer this year. Community hubs will continue and will continue to operate over the summer period, and we're looking at what their food support can be, but that's very much in conjunction with all the other great food support offers that we have across the city, so things like food banks and again some of the voluntary sector support.
Fantastic, and thank you ever so much for that. So just finishing off with schools and then Sharon, I'm going to come to you about health. Maxine, what are your thoughts on where we are and how we're going to progress?
Okay, where we are obviously is that school isn't the same as it was prior to the 23rd of March, but one of the things that we are doing is working with our schools in the city to look at the opportunities that there are to think about how we can actually design a recovery curriculum together and really think about the future. We've got some very talented school leaders and school teachers in this city. They are fully committed to trying to get the best possible education offer back in front of young people. They really do want to see children back in their classrooms. I can assure everybody about that. What they will do is that they'll use all their creativity, all their care to provide the best possible offer given the circumstances that they'll face, and they've been doing that. It's been humbling to see that the way that they've been meeting the challenge, and they'll continue to do so. The other thing that it's really brought out is the very strong partnership that we've got with schools across the city, because they are working so hard to share with each other the different ways that they're solving the problems that they face every day. And that's been a really, again, fabulous thing to see, the quality of partnership working.
And it absolutely is. It's absolutely fantastic to see what our guys are doing. Sharon, you've got about 15 seconds to tell me anything that you want to do with the health, and then I'm going to move on to opening the city.
Okay, just a quick comment from me then. The city has done a fabulous job over this first phase of the pandemic in working together and keeping the number of cases low. We need to continue to do that as we move forward and start to open up the city. We need to prevent the risk of a second wave of the virus. So continuing to work together to do that would be my kind of final message.
Fabulous. So social distance, keep washing your hands, and show everybody some forbearance. Andrew Lawson, I'm going to bring you in again for only 10 or 15 seconds. What are your thoughts on opening the city? I thought we had you. Hello? Okay, James, could you tell me where you are?
I think what I would say is that as the city is going to go through different stages in terms of its recovery, so different bits of industry will open at different times. We're expecting some of the hospitality trades to start to see new rules from the government on the 4th of July. So in the same way that business will be responding to that government advice and that public health advice, the council is going to need to do the same, and the way we manage our city centre will need to change and flex in response to that.
Many thanks for that. Andrew, I believe you're muted now, and then we need to quick comment from Andrew and Ian. So Andrew Lawson to start with.
Can you hear me, Paula?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, very briefly. I mean, just to say, round the city today, just to reassure the public that businesses have done a huge amount to be prepared. Some of them have got appointments in place. They've got PPE, a lot of advice, and are very welcoming. So all I'd say is please do support your local businesses, because retail and hospitality will make a huge difference as to how the economy restarts, because out of the 9 million people furloughed in the UK, about 3 million work in retail and hospitality. So getting that part of our economy up and running in the next few weeks, nationally and at a local level, will make a huge difference to how the whole economy comes back in the coming months.
Okay, well, I'm dreadfully sorry, guys. We are literally running out of time. So just my final thoughts on this are, wow, what an awful lot of work has gone on right the way across the city, breadth and depth, absolutely fantastic. And many, many thanks for all the work from the elected councillors and from the officers and all of our partners across the city. Our city is fantastic, it's safe, it's welcoming, come and enjoy. Many thanks for all of your time this evening. Goodbye.
Bye.